The drum rack in Ableton Live is an incredibly powerful tool. It can hold, of course, single one-shot drum samples. It is called drum rack after all, but it can also hold basically any other kind of sample too, like these chord one-shots. I'm saying one-shots because I'm talking about these single samples, whether that's a single kick, a single snare, or a single chord. But it doesn't stop there. You can also drop full-on loops into the drum rack. And that essentially enables you to make full tracks from right in the drum rack. But to understand how to take advantage of the drum rack, you need to understand two other devices in Ableton Live. Follow along with me at home. If you're new here, my name is TAETRO. Welcome to the channel. We're going to do a little drum rack crash course today, brought to you by Synido, the folks who make this TempoPAD C16 Bluetooth MIDI controller. We'll talk more about that later. And if anything we talk about today is a little too complex, I've got a full Ableton Live for Beginner series right here on the channel. But I'm going to walk you through and hopefully you'll be able to be up and running with drum rack in no time. Just follow along. So let's start from scratch. First, I'm going to go into Ableton's library under Instruments, and I'm going to find Drum Rack. And I'm going to pull just a blank empty drum rack into the empty space right here so that we have a new drum rack track. And just looking at the drum rack as it loads, you can see there's note names here, C1, C#1, D1. We've got these little boxes, each of which can hold a device, and within that device can be a sample. It's like a nested doll situation. It goes drum rack, a sampling device, and then a sample. And I'm being vague about the device because there's actually a couple options for what goes into this drum rack. The first option is called Simpler. If I click and drag Simpler from our instrument library into C1, it puts a simpler device onto this pad right here. But if I play that on the controller, I'm not hearing anything because there's no sample here. Now, before we go any further, if you're following along at home, what I want you to do is select one-shot mode and then right-click this pad and click Save as Default Pad. I'll explain more about that later. Confirm. And now let's find a sample to load in. So we'll go to Samples, we will search Kick, One Shot, and your options here might vary depending on what you have in your sample library. But just search through your sample library, find a kick that you like, and drop it into that Simpler where it says Drop Sample here. Now, we can play that kick sound. The reason I had you switch this to one-shot mode to start is because this is the mode that makes more sense for drums. And since we're in drum rack, that's probably going to be the main use. I've got another video explaining more of the ins and outs of Simpler. I'll link it down below. But for now, for working with drums, we've got a bunch of things that we might need. We can transpose the sample here in the Simpler. We have fade in and fade out. Doesn't make too much sense here for the kick drum, but it is useful if you want to kind of fade the edges of a sample. And we've also got a filter. So now, since we set Simpler as our default drum rack pad, if I search snare here in my samples, and I find a snare that I like, when I drop it into drum rack, just an empty space, it automatically loads in a Simpler in one-shot mode because we set that as a default. Okay, that's pretty basic, but Simpler also has another big advantage. I'm going to search my library now for a loop, and maybe a piano loop. This one sounds good to start with. I'm going to click and drag this in and drop it in up here on C2. Now, if I trigger that sample, and I turn on my metronome, I can see that this sample is 92 beats per minute, but my project is, let's bring it down even further away, 80 beats per minute. Now start the project and the sample at the same time. Way off, right? But don't worry because Simpler has time stretching and warping. So I can select warp. Under here we have different modes. I like to use complex for anything that isn't strictly drums. And now, same experiment. We're in time. We could even shorten this sample to be exactly 2 bars. I can hold Options or Alt and copy that sample to another pad. And we can transpose that. So now, we can start building a beat. So in my mind, the main advantage of Simpler in the drum rack is that we can do time stretching. Keep that in mind because it's time to talk about the other sampling device that can live within drum rack. Let's go back to instruments, clear out our search bar, and we're going to find drum sampler. Makes sense. Drum sampler goes in a drum rack. Click and drag that in, and let's drag it onto F#1. Okay, now of course if I play that pad, no sound once again, just like with the Simpler. And to follow along at home, do me a favor, right click on this pad and now click Save as Default Pad again. Similarly to Simpler, if now we go to our samples and we search for something, let's search for a hi-hat one shot. That one sounds pretty good. And we drop it into this black space right here. Well, now we've got our hi-hat. And it's working fairly similarly to the Simpler, right? But it just looks a little different. And we even have some similar controls. Like we have attack, which essentially functions as a fade in. Hold and decay if we wanted to shorten up a sample. We can change the start point of a sample. We can change the overall length. That's another way to shorten up a sample. Change the sample gain. We've got transposition, just like in Simpler. And we've even got a filter. Something unique we have here, though, are effects. So it defaults to this stretch effect, which is kind of interesting. But there are a number of other effects that are really useful for working with drums. Let's put a little 8-bit bit crushing on this. Or maybe we could put a little noise on top. Make it a little brighter. And you know what? I wish I could apply those effects to this kick. I could go into audio effects and find an effect I like and put it on the kick. Instead, why don't I right click in the title bar of the kick Simpler and convert it, Simpler to drum sampler. Now, we have the same exact kick we have before. It sounds exactly the same, but I have access to these effects. And I might want to add a little more punch to this kick. And I might want to add a little FM tone to this kick. So what's the big deal? We've got drum sampler and we've got Simpler. When should you use each one? You can accomplish some of the same things with both, but the big highlights in my mind are Simpler is great if you need to time stretch a sample, or if you want to do any kind of tuning and keep the sample in time. And then drum sampler, well, it's in the name. It's a simplified interface that's meant to be used for drums specifically, whereas Simpler is kind of meant for a bunch of different things. If you need time stretching, go Simpler. If you're just working with drums, use drum sampler. Now, when you followed along with my process there, I told you, okay, go ahead, drag drum sampler in, right click and save as default pad. You can choose, do you want drum sampler to be your default pad or do you want Simpler to be your default pad? Whichever you choose, whenever you click and drag a sample into an empty slot, it will automatically load in that kind of device. So it's just a personal decision whether you're going to be mostly working with drums or mostly working with other types of samples like I am here. You can just choose a default. And of course, as you're seeing in this drum rack here, setting a default doesn't mean that you can't mix and match later in the future. So utilizing the combination of drum samplers and simplers, I was able to create this beat. And if I play back the full loop, it pretty much sounds like a finished track. And I created this full performance using the Synido TempoPAD C16, which is a fantastic controller if you're thinking about creating this type of finger drumming performance, or if you just need a controller for drum rack. First of all, this controller is Bluetooth, which means the whole tutorial and the whole performance that I created with this was created entirely wirelessly with Bluetooth MIDI, and you don't need to worry about latency with Bluetooth MIDI. And latency with Bluetooth MIDI is not the same as latency with audio. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be able to make the performance that I did with the C16. The large pads are excellent for finger drumming, and you've got separate banks so that you can trigger different samples across the different banks. Same goes for the mappable encoders and faders, and you can utilize the pads not only for playing drums, but you can also play your synths with them too. There's even a dedicated note mode. The final thing I will tell you about the C16 is that if you hold this orange encoder and press any of the pads or move any of the other knobs or faders, you get full control over what kind of MIDI message these controls are sending, what channels they're sending on, what minimum and maximum value they're sending, all from the controller. You don't even need to plug into a computer, which is especially useful if you're going to utilize the TempoPAD with apps on the iPad, or if you just need to make a quick change without the software, which they do have, by the way. I did a full video on this controller. If you want to learn more, check that one out. Thank you to Synido for sponsoring this video. But now let's fully take advantage of the drum rack. I'm going to close the little side library for now and open up this drum rack so that you can see each individual drum pad or sample in the drum rack is essentially here as its own track with its own volume meter, pan, track on and off, solo. And it almost works like a group in Ableton Live. I mean, a drum rack is essentially a group of devices, whether that be a simpler or a drum sampler. So if we open up that group, you get the full mixing capability of each individual piece. So you've got the ability to mix each individual piece of the kit right from here. This also means, like if I select this closed hi-hat sound, for instance, that you can put effects on individual samples in the drum kit as well. So this sloppy delay effect, I love having it on my hi-hat, definitely don't want it on my kick. So if I look at the kick, there's no effects here. Now, something you might have already noticed are these colorful tracks here, bass, chords, and vocals. And these are essentially groups within this group. It's like the nested doll analogy continues to follow us through. So my bass samples are in this group because I want to process them together. Same goes for my chords. Those are in a group. And then vocal one-shots are in their own group. I'll switch banks on the C16. And you can see that the vocal group has a reverb on the full group. All of the vocals are being processed through the same reverb. But we can have even more fun with routing different sounds within the drum rack to different effects. We'll talk about that in a second, but let me talk about something else that's really important, which is choke groups. So I'm going to jump back to the drum rack we were working with before because it's a little less complicated than that other track. And if you've been learning Ableton Live, you probably know they love little tiny icons that are nearly impossible to see. So if you look on the sidebar here, we're going to find this little list icon and reveal the chains in a drum rack, which is going to unlock some powers for us. Then clicking a little tiny hard to see icon unveils more little tiny hard to see icons. So we're going to click this IO icon to reveal even more. And now we can see a column called choke, which is a very basic functionality of a drum rack like this. Essentially, it means if two sounds are assigned to the same choke group, they will cut each other off and they cannot play at the same time. This is really useful for closed and open hi-hats. So I'm going to go into the choke groups. I'm going to choose a number that I want to assign them to. Doesn't really matter which number. I'm going to choose 16 because it's the easiest to click on. And I just want to make sure that both sounds are assigned to the same choke group, 16. So now the closed hi-hat and the open hi-hat cannot play at the same time. You can hear that the closed hi-hat chokes the open hi-hat. Another case for this, jumping back to the other drum rack, is for these chords. I don't want those blending over each other. You can see that they're all assigned to the same choke group. If they had no choke group, here's what it would sound like. they all kind of mush and don't blend together very well. So we assign them all to the same choke group. No mess and mud. Let's go back to the other drum kit because it's easier to look at. And let's reveal one more kind of hidden menu. And it's the return tracks here. And that unveiled a window that says drop audio effects here. This is different than putting an effect on a particular pad, and I'll show you why. Let's go under audio effects and find a reverb. Drag and drop the reverb where it says drop audio effects here. Now, if you notice something where it says audio 2, that suddenly populated. And what I'm gonna do in this list is find the hi-hat. There's no reverb on the hi-hat. No reverb on any of the drums. So what's going on with this reverb here? Well, we need to route audio to that reverb. And you might have guessed, we do that by going under audio 2 and route it to the reverb. Suddenly, hi-hat's got the reverb. No other element has that reverb unless we specifically want to route it to that reverb. Now maybe I want to also route the snare to that reverb. Let's definitely route the open hi-hat to that reverb as well. But let's route the piano to a different effect. This time, let's route it to maybe an echo. I'm going to find the echo and I'm going to drop it in where it says drop audio effects here. So now we have A and B, two different effects that we can route different samples to. I'll find both piano samples in the list here, route them to the echo. Start of a little something there, but now we've set up two different destinations for different samples. And I should note that if we open up the drum rack, you can see on each individual track the audio too. Rack output is just the main output of the drum rack, and then we've got the two effects that we've just set up there. And it doesn't stop there. Here's the last thing I'll share with you. The effects that we built here don't have to just be single effects. So if we wanted to add an auto filter to this B return track with the echo, we could go ahead and do that. And let me just set up this auto filter so it has a bit of movement. This is going to sound like chaos. So now we have echo and auto filter on that track. I don't know if I would use that specific effects chain, but that's just to show you that you can build effects chains, you can put effects racks into these return channels. And the way many producers who use like MPCs or SP404s do this is by setting up separate tracks for your drum elements and your other melodic and harmonic instruments. This allows you to process elements individually. You can hear all the melodic and harmonic elements are not affected, but the drums have floated away. Now, the drums are unaffected, but my top layer melodic and harmonic stuff are sent to that delay. Maybe I want to do a beat stutter, but only on the drums. Everything else is going, drums are stuttering. Now just melodic stuff is stuttering. And of course, we've got filters. And it is, of course, also useful to like put a filter on everything. But routing effects separately for drums and instruments can make for a great dynamic performance. All right, that's the crash course. I think I might have glazed over a couple things, so leave any comments or questions down below. I really didn't touch on this, but in drum rack, we're only looking at 16 samples at a time. 128 samples can fit in this drum rack, so you could build multiple tracks in a single drum rack. You could really fill up each sample slot. With a controller like the C16, you have 4 banks to choose from. That's 4 banks of 16, so you can see how far you can go with that. I definitely recommend this controller if you're looking to either just do beat making, production in Ableton Live, or if you want to make cool performances, or especially if you're using any apps, because Bluetooth is clutch for mobile beat making. Synido usually hooks everybody up with a discount for a limited time, so check that out in the description or the pinned comment. If you all want more tutorials like this, definitely let me know. Become a channel member if you want to support the channel directly. That's all for now. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been TAETRO. Have a good one.